This evening's shiur is sponsored by Morty and Stephanie Shapiro in wishing people a refuah shlema, a year of good health, that all those who are sick should recover, and that's a very important prayer, that hopefully our prayers were heard on Rosh Hashanah. So thank you to Morty and Stephanie. Vakasha, Dr. Marc, it's all yours.
Okay, hello everyone. It is the 21st of September, 2020. Let me begin. Hold on, let me get my chat screen open so I know. Let me begin with sharing my screen. Let's see, a number of people sent me some things. So where's the screen I want to show you? Here. Thank you. I think it was Avi who sent it to me. We spoke about Rav Aaron's daughter. I didn't even know this. I showed you her doctoral dissertation, which was never completed, but she finished a master's at Columbia. Here it is. Sino-Soviet differences on China's representation in the United Nations. History, policies, and prospects. She knew Russian. And so I guess that made it easier for her. But so there you go. A couple other things I want to mention relevant to last class. If those who are in the New York area get the Jewish link. So if you got the Jewish link, they had this insert in it, Kashrus Currents from the Star K. Very nice magazine. This is issue 43. If you go online, you see all the other issues. Currents with a K. And we had spoken earlier about let's say, Scotch and Rav Moshe's Heter. And I mentioned this idea that, in my opinion, this idea that to say that, this type of Scotch is not kosher, I mean, how could you say that? We have someone right now listening who's a musmach of Rav Moshe. You're going to say that because Rav Moshe's nifter 30 years or so, that all of a sudden his opinion doesn't count? Well, which everyone used until, 20 years ago. But the Star K is good. They have it, they call it Mahadrin. So it's, they speak about, they're not saying that the other Scotch and everything is not kosher, but they speak about liquor lemahadrin, which I guess is the right way to put it. And I'll tell you one thing else as well. If you look at Rav Moshe's tshuva on it, he acknowledges that there's room to be machmir. And if you reach a point where, let's say, you have the same quality and the same price to different types of liquor and schnapps and Scotch and all that, under hashgacha, I don't know if Rav Moshe would permit you to drink the other. Remember, b'diavad, you're allowed to, because the stuff from the sherry casks, they're bottle in 6. But if you have the equivalent, we have the tshuvas from Rav Moshe where he says you shouldn't rely on bittul, just rely on these things if you have hashgacha. Rav Henkin also says that a lot of these ideas of bittul, that if we have something, which we actually is under hashgacha, you shouldn't rely on the other things. Like, it's not like we're in Europe where you just rely on all these matters because you don't have hashgacha. So it is possible that Rav Moshe would hold that when we reach the point where you have the same quality and the same price under hashgacha, that no longer can you rely on the heter of bittul. These magazines, something else is funny about these magazines. I've noticed something in the Harei world in the last, I only think it's like the last 20, 30 years. It's definitely not if you look at things like 50, 60 years ago. That for some reason, it's almost like if we would take, if you're not in the Harei world, you take a picture and you want to comb your hair or something, you have to look a certain way. For some reason, in the Harei world, every time you take a picture, you need to put the hat on. If you look, for example, at the different yeshivas, they have pictures of all the rebbes. The idea that you would take, now granted, I can show you pictures of Gedol Yisrael without a hat on, but it's like you're not fully dressed. Like they say, not fully dressed without a smile. You're not fully dressed without your hat on. So go to the different yeshivas that have websites, many of them do now, and you look, every time they show a picture of the rebbe, it's always with the hat on. And here, like I said, you see it. I guess they feel naked without the hat, but it's I find it just curious because it became part of the dress code. I listened to what I said last week, and I mentioned that when the students of the Rav went to Israel, they met the Rav's Malamed. That's actually, no one corrected me. No, it's when they went to the Soviet Union, they met the Rav's Malamed. A couple other things here. I want to Malcolm Shmoyal, who listens to us every week, said that I mentioned last class there of Chaim Soloveitchik. He wasn't so makpid on minyan, but he was very makpid. He always held Kriyas Torah. He held it was a chiyuv. And Nachum Shmoyal, who's he's a real scholar in Chabad, he says to me, and I think I knew this, that and he doesn't know why, though he's going to look into it, that until 1988, the Rebbe almost never davened weekday chakras with a minyan, but he was makpid on Kriyas Torah. So the question is, did the Rebbe hold like Reb Chaim? I mean, we have these stories of Gedolim that for either they were learning or other things that they didn't feel that they needed to leave. If they're learning in one mitzvah, they don't need to leave and daven with a minyan. Today, I know it might be hard to understand. Rabbi Yaakov Weinberg, we know when he was in Berlin, he didn't daven sometimes the minyan on Mincha, because he was busy learning by himself. But so if anyone knows Chabad, what the Rebbe's, look, if Nachum Shmayahu doesn't know the reason, I don't know anyone else will. But two more things. I don't mention last names unless people tell me to, because maybe you don't want it to be known. I have an email here from Aryeh, and if it's the same Aryeh with the last name he doesn't talk about, who's published a lot of Sfarim that are on Otzar Chachma, well, first let me say I'm honored you wrote, but Aryeh from Lakewood in the past disagrees with something I said. So, and he asked me specifically if I could share it. So let me share it, and I'll tell you why I said what I said. First of all, he corrects me. I did say about Rav Abadi, who he remembers from Lakewood. I said he was poseach al shnei seipim. I think I corrected myself though, and I meant to say holech batelim. Poseach al shnei seipim means you can't really decide which way you're going to go. Holech batelim means, I meant to say holech batelim means you don't walk in the groove that everyone tells you should. But he had an objection to the way I formulated the issue of inviting non-religious and the tshuva of Or Sameach. Remember I said Rav Moshe had ruled it's forbidden to invite people who are going to drive on Shabbos. And I said that the Or Sameach turned to Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach. And I said that they were obviously looking for a heter, a permission. And he didn't like that language. And he said, because basically they asked this Rav Michal Shon, who was very close to Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, and whatever Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach would have said, they would have accepted, even if it's a stringent view. So I'll tell you what I told him. Look, looking for a heter is not shopping for a heter. Looking for a heter is what everyone does when they ask a shayla. If you ask a shayla whether this is kosher, you're asking for a permission, because if you don't want it, you don't have to eat it. Whenever you have a difficult question and they ask the rabbi, they're asking if there is a heter. If there's not a heter, there's not a heter. But that's what they're looking for. My point was, had Rav Moshe ruled that you could invite people on Shabbos, even though they'll drive, then there'd be no reason to ask someone else. So clearly they were looking to see if there's room to be lenient. So in that respect, I disagree with Rabbi, but he does make a point which I accept, that from the standpoint of the Or Sameach, it's possible that they could have seen this as a separate type of case, because Rav Moshe was speaking about individuals, and they're a kiruv organization. So that's why they turned to Jerusalem, who then they asked Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach. So I accept that. And then he tells me that Rabbi Shoen said to him, and this is not mentioned anywhere in the tshuva of Rav Shlomo Zalman, and no one knows this, and no one accepts this as the reading, but he says this is what it is, that Rav Shlomo Zalman's heter was only for a kiruv professional, not for any Joe Schmo who decides to be nice to be mekarif someone. No one assumes that to be the case, but I thank you, Rabbi, for pointing that out. Everyone assumes that you can invite someone over, according to Rav Shlomo Zalman, even if they drive, because you are going to be privately, you're going to be showing him Shabbos and Kashrus. The idea that you need to have a degree in quotes in kiruv to invite them over, and it's only good for kiruv professionals, so that's not, and for Sternbach, of course, you wouldn't need that anyway. But that's interesting, because I wonder why that wasn't made clear by Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach. And I guess it could be Lamaisa, because it could be just someone who you have no interest in being Mekarev. You just enjoy their company. And but still, if someone comes to your house and he sees Shabbos, you never know how it could influence them. So if technically it's permissible, it's hard perhaps to make that distinction. But thank you for pointing that out. Okay, one more thing I want to tell you before we begin. they put online today a new shiur from Rav Soloveitchik. So I want to, hold on, I want to show you that because it's relevant to what we said last class. Here it is, the one I want to show you. Rav Soloveitchik is discussing Yom Kippur, all sorts of interesting things. I just want to show you two things because one relates to what I said last class. So let me, I have to, hold on, I have to put the sound on so you can hear me. And then I looked a little forward on it, so I saw something else. So pay attention to the Rav.
Was ist das gewesen? Was ist nötig gewesen? Haben sie rein für wir sagen Asura Ruge Malchus. Interessant ist. Aber der Asura Ruge Malchus in Kippur viel länger und mit mehr Protein. Und jeder Prat ist scheuderlich. Es ist wie Rahman al-Islam, die Protein von der Holocaust, von der Concentration Camps. Jeder Prat ist scheuderlicher von dem Frieden. Ist der Asura Ruge Malchus der Piu, der Sach länger wie der Piu der Arze Albonen, Tishu. Der Rentner ist Poshet. Tische B'Av haben wir eine Sache Zeit zu sagen Kines und der ganze Tag ist gewidmet zu Kines.
Okay, remember I said last week that originally Kinos, the Rav could do it. The Rav could do Kinos all day with the explanations. And when I was young, I mean, that's all you had really is Kinos. But that was the point I was making last week. Today, the generations have declined, as they say. The Gemara already speaks about it. And today, we don't have the koach. It declined in all ways. The Lincoln Douglas debates, we're coming up. I think we're having a debate. Those were, I think those were 3 hours long. The first person would speak, I think, for 30 minutes, and then a 60-minute reply. What was it? I wrote it down. I think you can find the details. I think, there were 3 hours. One candidate spoke for 60 minutes, then the other spoke for 90 minutes, and then a 30-minute rejoinder. Can you imagine today anyone listening to someone speak for 90 minutes and then 60? So we don't have the koach. So today, that's what I was talking about last week. Even in the Harei world, they have Tisha B'Av programs, they have lectures on Tisha B'Av, they show videos, Prophet's Time heritage, things like that. So it's interesting that I saw this today. The Rav is saying the Rav could actually devote an entire day to Kinos. And then I went a little forward in it, and I saw something else also interesting. So I'll just play that for you, another minute.
Chutz למקדוש ist Stachwoen nicht kein Kiyum. Aber die Stachwoen, was wir alle machen in Kippur, wir folgen doch nicht im Shulchan Aruch. Der Shulchan Aruch sagt doch, der Chasen soll doch nicht rühren in Kippur vom Platz. Weil die Stachwoen nicht mit ihnen die Gemara, es ist ein Minhag und der Chasen steht schon im Nesser. Bei ihm will es Chazor als ein Schatz, soll sich nicht rühren. Aber der Taz hat es schon gemerkt, und durch sich hat der Taz hat schon gemerkt, und hat gesagt, aber mir folgt nicht. Aber ich schäme mich damit. Mir fällt hier kaputt. Mir fällt hier Stachwoe. Hier doch erwarten wir mal schon, als Aid wie Reb Chaim, mit seiner Breitkeit, wo es hat allemal aufpassen, alles für die Gemorre, und der Goyen, der Wilner Goyen, aber nicht wenn sie gewähnt Chazonim, haben sie nicht, aber sehr mir, meine ich, hat man nicht gemacht, der Stachwoe. Nicht richtig. Der Wilner Goyen vielleicht mit Stachwoe sein, vielleicht zerbucken. Hey, Reb Chaim. Reb Chaim hat allein gesagt.
So then he says, here.
Sie do einmal, wenn der Minhag, a viele Reb Chaim und der Wilner Goyen, die Bale Aloche können nicht brechen, der Minhag.
So the Rav says very interestingly that the Chazan shouldn't really bow, according to the Shulchan Aruch. Like he goes on later and describes how we move the bima there, the table, so he could bow. But according to Shulchan Aruch, it doesn't matter. You shouldn't do any of that. But our minhag is not to. And then he says that Reb Chaim and the Gaon, we usually think of them as not following minhagim if they didn't agree with it. But in this case, they followed it. Although he says he saw the Reb Chaim bow, but Reb Chaim wasn't the Chazan, so I don't know why that's really relevant. But his larger point is that they sometimes the minhag, even Reb Chaim and the Gra would accept it if they didn't agree with it. Okay, everyone, we're picking up now in the Sefer. We're on, we ended up number 71 on page Kuf Samachay, and I'm actually going to skip Siman Ayin Aleph and Siman Ayin Bet. there's certain things that, what do they say? It's the Yafalahen. They're just certain things that in just online and everything, a little bit. I don't know. It's not the sort of thing necessarily to put online, the discussions, sexual matters, etc. But we'll go to 73. I Simon Ayin Gimel, and the tshuva comes from this rabbi, who we have classes about him. Actually, not from him; it's from his secretary. He told what answer to give, and this is Rav Avram Shapiro. You can listen on Torah in Motion to the classes on him. He was Rosh Yeshiva of Merkaz Harav for many, many years, and also the chief rabbi of the state of Israel. And my question to him, and also to Rabbi Greenblatt, the same question, was on the one hand a simple question. When you get married and you say the Harei mekudeshet, everyone says Harei mekudeshet li be-taba'at, and then what's the next word? Zu or zo. The Ashkenazic minhag is zu. Harei mekudeshet li be-taba'at zu. And yet, if you know Hebrew grammar, you know there's the word zo. Zo is the same as zot. It's feminine. Tabat is a feminine word, and therefore it should be tabat zo. I first became aware of this because B. Barry Levy, if we have any Montreal people here, I think now he lives in Toronto, but he was in Montreal. He wrote a very, very harsh review of Art Scroll years ago, like 3 different versions of it. A shorter version and then a longer version. And he points out in one of the areas, Art Scroll gets dictok wrong, is that they say Harei mekudeshet be-taba'at zu. It's sort of, really not a criticism so much of Art Scroll, because every Ashkenazic siddur says tabat zu. And what is zu? As Levy points out, we have the word zu. We say it in davening, but zu means like witch or asher or something like that. So am zu ga'alta, the nation which you will redeem. But zu does not, there is no word zu meaning this. There's zeh for men, masculine, and then there's zo or zot. So according to this, you should say Harei mekudeshet be-taba'at zo. And if you look at I just looked before at the new RCA siddur, they've broken with Ashkenazic minhag, and they have zo. And if you look at Arena Yisrael, and pretty much today, everyone growing up in Israel today, if you're not Haredi, you're going to say zo. But I was wondering, and I asked Rav Avram Shapiro, and the answer comes back that I've been requested from the chief rabbi to tell you that you should say zu. And for a long time, I couldn't figure this out. And yet the truth is that this is, now I understand it. This is not some mistake, Ashkenazic mistake of 100 years ago. This is an old Ashkenazic minhag to say zu. And not only that, there's an article here. Let me show you something else. You can look online, you can find it, the whole article on the website of the Academy for the Hebrew Language. And there's an article I found by a Hebrew scholar to show that this goes back long, long time ago in Ashkenazic tradition, that zu was the equivalent of zeh. It's not just a mistake. It was the equivalent of say, that is, you could say zu for feminine or zo. And therefore, it's not to be regarded as an error. So much so that even though I was very makpid when I got married, and for I know for my children's wedding to say zo, it's really not a mistake. If it's a mistake if someone does something recently, but if you can show 1,000 years, let's say, that Ashkenazim are doing it, then that's just it's just an alternate way. And the article in one of these Hebrew language journals shows that zu was an alternate way of saying zo. It's not biblical Hebrew, and it's not modern Hebrew, but it exists. And I thought this is just a Rav Avram Shapiro, and then we'll see another Ashkenazi, Ephraim Greenblatt. And lo and behold, something happened to me just 2 weeks ago. Let me show you a picture. Let's see if anyone recognizes this picture, this person. We're here. Well, you can see the name on top. His name is Rav Eliyahu Zini. He, for many years, was the rabbi of the Technion. Being that he's an incredible right-winger politically, it's really interesting that they kept him on there. He also was professor of mathematics for many years. Now he's a Rosh Yeshiva. There's a Hezra Yeshiva in Haifa called Or Vishua. He is Algerian born and the author of many Sfarim. He's quite unusual in that he attacks Rav Ovadia Yosef in a way that no one else does. I'm not really sure why he's so sharp. He sees him as changing Sephardic minhag, but full of very interesting Sfarim. He also is the one who was translated into Hebrew and published much of the material of Eliyahu ben Amozik. I find it also unusual that Zinni, who's a really extremist on certain matters, is attracted to Ben Amozik, who's very much of a humanist. But in any event, I only had contact with Rav Zinni before 2 years ago. One time, I sent an email to the yeshiva. I bought books from the yeshiva. That's going to explain maybe how he had my address. But I sent him one email asking him a question about Ben Amozik, and that was it. And then lo and behold, last year, I get a shipment of books. It just arrives without any warning at my house, like 7 of his books. I already had like 4 of them, so I gave my friend the extras. From Rav Zinni, all of his books, 8 Zairas, the rest of them. So then we began a nice correspondence. I can tell you he's the reason I didn't go to Algiers 2 summers ago. 2 winters, last winter. One of my hobbies is I like to go to the old graves and everything of the rabbis. And in Algiers, although there aren't even a million of Jews there, you have the graves of the Tashbates, Shimon Samach Doron, and the Rivash, which were redone in the early 2000s because the president of France was coming to Algiers. And also one day I want to go to Tlemcen as well in Algeria. But I wanted to go to Algiers. If you're in the Paris airport, you see flights flying all the time to Algiers, a few times a day. It's very easy. You get on, you go in the morning, you arrive there early afternoon, and you come back like the next evening or something. And I wanted to go see these graves and maybe see some other things. So I told this to Rabbi Zinni because he's from Algeria. And he put me in touch with his brother in Paris, who's a business person who has traveled there, who convinced me that it's absolutely a danger. It's a sakana for an American to go there, he says, and definitely it's a sakana for someone to go there who's going to go to Jewish sites. So he really scared me, and we're not going to have a Torah motion trip anytime soon. But no, I wasn't going to bring anyone else. It's just going to be me. But so instead, I went to Tunis, which was fun. But 2 weeks ago, lo and behold, this book, I get this book, 8 Zairas, you see it, it arrives in my door, nice inscription, etc., Yikra Doraisa. And in the back here, he has an article, page 301, Diktuk Nachon, Shehu Bitoy Havana Nochana, and he deals with how you pronounce it, Zo or Zu. I went online today, and every single siddur I found on Otzar Chachma, Sephardic siddur, all has Zo. And Rav Zinni claims that in Algeria, the practice is, well, he doesn't only say Algeria, he says throughout the Sephardic world, it's to say Zu. And he has a whole article here explaining why Zu is the proper way of saying it, or at least a proper way of saying it. And he goes on to about all these people who think that they're so smart today, and they want to change how we've been doing things. They want to make everyone a Toeh B'dvar Mishnah. That means you don't know anything, etc., etc. And they want to show how everyone else are Burim, and that they're Pikrim. And then he points out, don't they even know that in the Haggadah, what do we say in the Haggadah? We say Matzah Zu. We don't say Matzah Zo. So that's a proof, and the spelling goes back a long time. The only thing I'll say to Rav Zinni next time I speak to him is that, I want to know Otzar Chachma. And if you look in all the Sephardic Haggadahs I found, maybe not in Algeria, they say Matzah Zo. But really, we say Matzah Zu. At least that's in all the Haggadahs I've looked at that I've ever used. So not the biggest deal. Worth noting. But Rabbi Greenblatt adds an interesting point here. Oh, one more thing, though. So I mentioned Rav Zinni. So he has another thing in the book in which he speaks about the issue we dealt with a few weeks ago, more than a few weeks ago by now, about Birkas HaGomel. He has a long kuntras, 40, 50 pages on Birkas HaGomel, and he establishes that absolutely you only say it if it's a danger. If it's not a danger, you don't say it. And at the end, though, he talks about saying it on an airplane. So I wrote to him, I said, well, wait a second, you just said it's a danger, only if it's a danger. And we saw Rav Soloveitchik who held that if it's subjective. If you feel it's dangerous, and then Rabbi Greenblatt as well, you can say it. Otherwise, you don't have to. And he thinks everyone should say it on airline trips, not just over the ocean, but just going on a plane. So I wrote to him, how could you say that? Especially he's a mathematician. Statistically, I said, it's a very small danger going on an airplane. So why would you say it? So he writes back to me that about statistics. Statistics. What's the expression? There's liars and lies and statistics. He says that the issue is not how often there are accidents, which he acknowledges there's not a lot of danger. However, when you do have an accident, he says the totzaot are catastrophic, that they're disastrous. Like if a plane goes down, everyone's going to die probably. And he says, when you look at it that way, it's not about how often the accident is, but the idea that if there is an accident, and that's his point, and maybe I can publish this maybe if we come out with volume 2 of Igros Malchi Rabbanan, will include his letter. I also asked this question to Rabbi Ephraim Greenblatt. We've heard a good deal about Rabbi Ephraim Greenblatt, and he says the same thing that Rav Avram Shapiro. He says that I've been with many Rosh Yeshivot and Rabbanim, and they all say Tabat Zu. Although that until recently, everyone said Tabat Zu. It's only when people started becoming attentive in the Ashkenazi world to grammar that in certain segments of our community, I've been paying attention in recent years at weddings, and they do say Tabat. So even in the RCA, let me show you this here. Although the Art Scroll Center has Tabat Zo, here you have my RCA Madrich. Every one who does weddings and funerals needs to have one of these things. So if you open it up to, here, I'll tell you the page here, the wedding here. And this is published, actually, it's published by the RCA, but you could tell it's an Art Scroll publication, the printing and everything, but it's the RCA. And this year is 1995. So here it says be-taba'at zo. So every RCA rabbi is going to open this. This is probably the first publication, first Ashkenazic Seder in America, I think, which would have the word zo. So even the RCA has decided to break with the Masorah, which is fine, I guess, and do zo. So Rabbi Greenblatt says it's zo, and then he says something interesting, which I did not know. If you open up the Shulchan Aruch to Simon Chav Zion, this is an Even Ezer. These are the laws of marriage. He tells you how to get married. The title of Simon Chav Zion is, what is the language of Kiddushin that you get married? And then he begins and says, so you can, let's say you're giving kesef. Remember, you don't need a ring. Rings are, the rings go back to the Onik time, so you don't need a ring. In Yemen, they never used a ring. He says you can either give a pruta, money, or something that's worth a pruta. And then what does he say that the lashon is? Rabbi the Shulchan Aruch says, Harei at mekudeshet li bazeh. I never heard of that until he told me, and then Rabbi Greenblatt says, why don't we say that? If you look in the Rishonim already used the expression Harei at mekudeshet li be-taba'at zo with this ring. And I guess if it was a pruta, you'd say pruta zo, or it was something else. But the Shulchan Aruch doesn't say that. The Shulchan Aruch says the lashon is Harei al mekudeshet li bazeh. With this, you are betrothed to me. Not to mention specifically what it is. And none of us do that. And he says, Rabbi Greenblatt says to look in the Be'er Heitev. The Be'er Heitev says, he quotes from Turkey, the Knesset Agdola, who says that their version is Harei mekudeshet li be-taba'at kiddushin zo kadas Moshe v'Yisrael. Getting married with this ring for kiddushin. So I thought that's unusual. And as long as we're on that, I'll tell you something that I found in one of my great books. Some of you also like this book, Ziviv Emily, Rabbi Asher Anshel Miller. It's called he wrote Svarim, Shelos and Shuvos, but he also wrote a book of memoirs. and it's published under the title Ola Moshe Abba. I thought they would never reprint it because some of the stuff in there is like really shocking. But no, it was reprinted and it wasn't even censored, and there's all sorts of great stuff in it. The book was written when his father was in communist Romania, and it was later smuggled out to Israel and published it. If you look on page 236, he quotes it's called the Shemin Rokeach of Eliezer Lov, who asks a very good question. Why do we say, with this ring you are betrothed to make Kedas Moshe Yisrael? What do you mean Kedas Moshe Yisrael? Why don't you say Kedas Torah, like the law of the Torah, or according to halakha? What does it mean, Kedas Moshe Yisrael? When do you ever use that expression? And what does that mean? Either Kedas Moshe or Kedas Yisrael. But in either case, it's the Torah law. So he gives an explanation as follows. This is homiletics. Like you'll hear another homiletic explanation soon from Rav Leon Modna, but this is good. You'll remember this, I think, because I think no one can come up with a good explanation as to why that is. So this is the good one you can remember. This is what he says. Moshe was a great shepherd, a faithful shepherd for the Bnei Israel, and he loved the nation of Israel. And the nation of Israel loved Moshe, and they cried over his death. What does it say? 30 days, right? And nevertheless, we know that for 40 years, they had all sorts of disputes. They disputed about food, about water, about meat, the Slav. And nevertheless, despite these disputes, they never got divorced. They remained together until the end. So this is what the Shemin Rokeach says. This is what the Chassan is saying to the Kal when they get married. No, he says, that it's impossible that we will not have disputes. We're going to have disputes, but nevertheless, we have to behave Kedas Moshe Yisrael, just like Moshe and Israel. Even though they argued, they worked it out, they remained together, and so too it'll be with us. So again, it's very nice to say it under a chuppah and all that. I can't imagine that's the real reason, but why they picked it. But if anyone can find out, as far as I know, no one's been able to determine why it's Das Moshe Yisrael. Just like the other thing that Rabbi Greenblatt mentions that I'm going to tell you, that which no one can give me the real reason, or maybe you can. He says to me, Samachli Mashakasav Beir Benasius Kapayim. He says, I rejoiced in what you sent me an explanation for Nasias Kapayim. Now I regret that in the book, this Sefer was just reprinted now in Eretz Yisrael for the third time. And I don't like making changes, but I just corrected typos. But in retrospect, I should have had a footnote here, because everyone's going to look at it and they're going to say, well, Rabbi Greenblatt liked what you explained about duchening, but what did you explain? So here I will tell you what I told them. There's an old question. When they make the bracha, the kohanim, what do they say? And if you paid attention on Rosh Hashanah, you would have heard it. What do they say? That the kohanim have to bless ba'ava, with love. Where does this come from, ba'ava? What's that? Where's the source for this? Why? Who says they have to bless in love? Why, when the people made the bracha, why didn't you say to bless Bnei Yisrael? There have been many, many answers given, but no one really has the real answer, or at least I should say a conclusive answer. There's one answer that people give as a joke, but they don't realize that it was actually stated by the 17th century Venetian rabbi, Rav Leon Modna. We speak about him on our Italy trip. He's a very unusual rabbi. He wrote an autobiography. If you write an autobiography, you're unusual. He also tells us in an autobiography he was a gambler. He was a gambler, and he says he was addicted to it. He also tells us about his 25 different jobs. Unbelievably fascinating personality. It was translated to English, the autobiography, with an introduction by the great historian Natalie Zeman Davis. But this is what he says. Well, first of all, what does it say in the Torah? It says, Daber al Aaron of Lemor. Speak to, Hashem says to Avraham, to Moshe, speak to Aaron and his sons and say to them, Kotavarchu. Well, let me pull it up for you for a second so you can see this here. Hold on, let me get it. This is in Bamidbar, chapter 6, I believe. Yes. Here. Okay. Now, some of you have heard what I'm going to tell you, but it actually goes back to Modna. Look in here's chapter 6, verse 23. The barrel Aaron v'albanav lemar kotavarchu es bnei Yisrael amor lahem you should bless Bnei Yisrael, Aaron and his sons, and say to them, and then we have the bracha that we hear in Yevrecha, etc., that we all know that bracha. What Rav Modna says, and he says, I'm going to tell you this derech tzachut, which means like not so serious. He says, what does it say there? Ko tavrachu et bnei Yisrael. Thus shall you bless bnei Yisrael. Amor lahem. He says, amor balaz. Hainu ba'ava. Isn't that how you say it in French? How do you say love in French? Amor. Is it Italian also? I assume it's, how do you say love in Italian? I don't even know. Everything. Amore, yeah, same thing. Amore. So there it is. There's the pasuk, though. Amor. And in French, so he's saying the Torah is telling us they should speak Ko tavrachu b'nei Yisrael with love. Obviously, it's a joke. The Torah is not speaking in French or Italian, but this is a famous joke that people give, but it's actually found in the response of Leon Modno, Ziknei Yehuda, number 127, where that's what he says. But if anyone has a better reason, I think the Zohar deals with this as well, but that's what he mentioned to me. Okay, now I'm going to also skip number 75, even though Ellie and Israel wanted me to discuss it. Maybe I'll come back. It has to do with Geder Shibud Ha'isha L'isha. Also the sorts of things that I'll write about it. It's easier to write about it than speak about it. The responsibility of a wife in her obligations to her husband, etc. Because there's some problematic things that need to be explained. But let's go on. Maybe I'll come back to that later. If Ellie from Israel really wants me to say something, maybe I'll go back. Number 76 from Rav Mazuz. I've showed you his picture a lot. I don't need to show you anymore. And it's a short response, short letter, I should say. The first paragraph just deals with Shaul Lieberman. I had sent him my little booklet on Saul Lieberman and the Orthodox, which if you're interested, you can get on Amazon for all of $6. And he doesn't know English, but he can read the Hebrew section that he just mentions how Rav Zevin referred very positively to Professor Lieberman, that he was a relative of the Chazon Ish, etc. Okay. The second paragraph deals with the issue of pilegesh that we spoke about. A pilegesh is a concubine. No woman today wants to live as a concubine, but is it halakhically permissible, concubinage? The Rambam says no. The Rambam says that this is a privilege reserved for the king, but the Ramban and the majority of Rishonim hold that you can have a relationship with concubinage. Concubinage is like a common law wife or a live-in partner or something. You have responsibilities, but it's not complete marriage. And there have been cases where it's thought that the hectare of the pilegesh could be of value. We mentioned already last week about a kohen, perhaps, if you think it's important for him to be with a convert, otherwise she'll remain not Jewish. Maybe the pilegesh, because you can't marry her, but pilegesh would be a lesser prohibition. The issue of a yibum. If a woman can't get a yibum or chalitza, she can't remarry. There seem to be authority. There are Rishonim who hold that yet pilegesh, she could be a pilegesh. So there's a possibility, and I wrote a whole article on this, on the issue of pilegesh. Rav Yaakov Emden thought we should bring pilegesh back. He had his reasons. There's all, again, it doesn't work in our society today. I can't see why anyone would do this. Although Tzvi Zohar, Professor Tzvi Zohar, has written a lot about halakha. I don't think he's ever spoken for Torah Notion, but he's spoken for the Sephardic communities. He's really an expert in Sephardic halakha. He put forth a proposal today that you have all these people, they're not getting married till, let's say, later in life, and yet they want to live together and things like that, and they're not ready to get married. So he thought that we could, because there's a number of Sephardic authorities who permit pilegesh, so we can bring back pilegeshut. But what I wrote in particular was about, can you use a pilegesh when it comes to case of yibum? And Rav Mazuz says that it's questionable, it's very difficult to put it in. If we wanted to, all the rabbis would have to come together and make certain limits, etc. So he's not deciding halakhically, but you should know that there have been great authorities. Rav Masasu, Sholem Masasu, we spoke about, states, he paskins halacha l'maisa that even in today's day and age, you could have a pilegesh. he holds and in Morocco, the rabbis all held that was considered permissible, pilegesh. Remember, pilegesh, it's not a mistress. Sometimes it's translated. It's someone who you don't have complete marriage with. Like, there's a question: does it mean, some say kiddushin but not nisuin? Others say you don't need that. But it's a reciprocal relationship, and it's whatever. It could have certain halakhic, perhaps possibilities. It could open up certain things. Ramosha Malka also wanted to use that. But as a general rule, to bring back pilegesh, it would go against Jewish general sexual morality. So that's what Ramazuz says, that you need, at least as we understand it today, that will need to be in specific cases. The next responds, Kuf Ayin Vav, 176. The first paragraph of it just deals with a strange wording in the Torah. This is from 1992. The second paragraph is what's really interesting. And it deals with the author of this book, Milchamot Hashem. Levi ben Gershon. Although if you open up the book here, it says Levi ben Gershon, which is incorrect. We know his father's name was Gershon, but he's known as Gersonides. If he was, it should be Gersonides. Who do we have? We have Maimonides, and we have Nachmanides. I don't know if we have any others. I think if it, do we have any others? And I don't think so. We have Gersonides. And so it means, so that's the father, it means son of in Greek. So son of Gerson. Okay, so Ralbag, as he's known. We all know the Ralbag. We open up the Ralbag, and he's in the Mikros Gedolos. He's in the Mikros Gedolos Chumash, not Chumash Nach, and he's not in the Mikros Gedolos Chumash, but his commentary is important. It's been published. He also wrote this book, this philosophical book. The problem is that the Ralbag has. Oh, and the Ralbag was also a great scientist and astronomer. There's a crater on the moon named Rabbi Levi, and he's not the only rabbi with a crater. There's another crater called Zakut, Rav Avram Zakuto, from Portugal, who was influential. His materials were helpful when Columbus discovered America. And so we're going to talk all about him, God willing, when I go to Portugal. But Rav Avram Zakuto, the author of the Sefer Yuchsin, also, so that's two rabbis with craters on them, on the moon, in their honor. So he's an important person, and yet his philosophy is unconventional. Let's put it that way. This book, Milchamot Hashem, was called by some Milchamot im Hashem. Not the wars of the Lord, the wars against the Lord. Incidentally, Rabbi Nachum Rabinovich from Ma'ale Adumim was a great lover of the Ralbag, and the yeshiva at Ma'ale Adumim came out with a beautiful edition. I think it's in 6 volumes of his commentary on Chumash. So what do I mean when I say the Ralbag? I have one page here. The Ralbag is unusual. Well, let me just give you his 2 most famous unusual views. The Ralbag holds that, I hope you're sitting down, that God does not know us as individuals. He only knows us derech haklal, as units, as groups. In other words, and that God does not know the future, what our future choices are. So you decide you're going to do this or that. And the old question is, if God knows the future, how do you have free will? The Rambam deals with this, and because you might think you have free will. And don't say it's like someone standing on top of a mountain, he sees which direction you're going to go. It doesn't affect you because you don't know, because how could you choose anything otherwise? At the end of the day, if I know what your choice is going to be, even if you don't know, then really you don't have free will. So the Rambam's solution to this problem is that God's knowledge is different than human knowledge. That yes, if a human would know the future, you wouldn't have free will. Even though you think you have free will, you really don't. But God's knowledge is of a sort, Rambam writes this even in the Mishnah Torah, in Hilchos Tshuva, that God's knowledge is of the sort that we can't understand it, that he can see the future, because there's no future. It's like, I guess you could say, the eternal present. And that his knowledge of the future doesn't change us. That's what he says. What does the Ralbag say? The Ralbag says no. The Ralbag says that God does not know the future. Not only forget about God does not know us as individuals. That's radical in and of itself. But God does not know the future. So your choices, and he reads the whole Torah this way. And he's not the only one. Rav Raphael Bardugo, who we've mentioned from Morocco, and then the Rabbi Ashkenazi, there's a whole group of figures who actually read the Torah this way and thinks that this doesn't remove anything, as Ralbag says, it doesn't take away from God's greatness, because God is only great is how great he can be. And even God cannot make 2 + 2 = 5. God cannot make the angles of a triangle equal the angle of a square. That doesn't take away from his omnipotence. God cannot know the future, what they call the contingent, because it hasn't happened yet. And you could read the entire Torah this way and make sense of it, and that's what the Ralbag does. But this is a unusual position, to put it mildly, in religious circles. How the Ralbag ended up in the Mikros Gedolos and Nach, okay, it's very interesting. His other unusual position is that the standard traditional view is that the world is created yesh me'ayin, from nothing, ex nihilo, as the expression is. You might say, well, how could anyone create something from nothing? Well, that's the Rambam says, humans cannot, but God can. Although the Rambam says that this is not, although in his 13 principles he says this is an ikar. In his Moreh Nevuchim he says this is not an ikar, not a principle of faith. The Rambam says, if you become convinced of Plato's view was that the world is created from eternal matter. Aristotle held that the world was never created. It always existed the way it is. Plato held that the world was created, but was created from eternal matter, because you can't create something out of nothing. And the Rambam says, if you want to accept Plato's view, it doesn't destroy the Torah, because you have miracles, you have everything, and you just say that the matter was not created because matter has been eternal. Don't say what came before the matter. Nothing came before the matter, because the matter is here eternally. The Ralbag accepts Plato's view. The Kuzari also says you can accept Plato's view if you want. But no, they don't accept it, at least not exoterically. The Rambam maybe esoterically does. So the Ralbag argues that God cannot create out of nothing, and therefore the world is created yesh me'yesh, from eternal, unformed matter. And these are the two radical positions of the Ralbag. And it created, as I said, that they called his book, which you can get in English now, translated 5 volumes from Seymour Feldman. Rabbi Bleich, incidentally, the great Rabbi Bleich, who's known to all of us as a great halakhic scholar, he actually has a PhD in Jewish philosophy, and he wrote a book called Providence in the Philosophy of Gersonides. And in the introduction to that book, he quotes all these attacks on the Ralbag, and it's an entire book on Ralbag and his attitude towards Hashgacha Pratit. There's another rabbi, his name is Klatskin. I don't know him personally, Shmuel Klatskin. He's a Chabadnik in Ohio, as I recall. He got a PhD at Brandeis University on the Ralbag and creation. So a lot of people interested in the Ralbag. So I wrote to Rabbi Mazuz. I wasn't writing to him, for halakhic ruling. I just was curious as to what he would think about studying the Ralbag. Because in yeshiva circles, they like to keep controversial things away from people. So I wanted to know, for example, you go to let's wait till Art Scroll publishes a translation of the Moreh Nevuchim or something. They say they won't ever, but maybe they will. But these sorts of works are thought to be for the elites, not to expose people to these issues. So I wanted to know what his opinion was on study of the Ralbag. And he says, the Divrei Ralbag b'Chamas Hashem Yedulim. He says that the Ralbag's ideas are well known. And they already wrote, that is the other sages, Sherachokim Devarav Mina Emes. The Ralbag says is far from the truth. And Rabbi Mazuz says this was due to the troubles of Greek philosophy that trapped in its nets. Rabim v'chein shleim. In other words, many great people were brought in, were seduced, you could say, by the truths, which they thought, truths in quotes, you can put it, of Greek philosophy. Greek philosophy taught that you can't create something out of nothing. And therefore, the Ralbag fell into that. Then he says, it is forbidden to learn Milchamos Hashem. Only one who has filled his belly with Shas and Poskim, that is, one who's already Talmid Chacham, and he has to look there occasionally to see things. But even for someone who filled his belly with Shas and Poskim, can't actually, when I say can't, of course, all the great people like Rav Mazuz, he studied it. So, but he's saying, like, as a general rule, everyone should keep away from it, except if you're a great Torah scholar, and even then, you don't focus on it, because it can lead you astray. And then he says, the Abarbanel and the Yavitz. This is not, I think he means the Yosef Yavitz, not from the expulsion from Portugal, not Yaakov Emden, called it Lochamotav im Hashem, the wars against Hashem. He's actually mistaken here. I don't believe the Ralbag called it that, and maybe Yavitz called it that, but other people called it that. And then he says, Basileia and Amos Chachamim called it that. Then he says, see the Rivash. The Rivash has a famous tshuva in which the Rivash criticizes the Rambam for falling into the philosophy's trap and then for making mistakes, and also the Ralbag. And he says about the Ralbag, he's a great man, and we learn much from his works, but he made big mistakes. And he specifically refers to this idea that God doesn't know the future. Then he says, but his commentary on Tanakh, you can learn, and there's wonderful things in this, even though sometimes he departs from the proper path. And he gave an example. In Parshas Lech Lecha, God says to Avraham, go out and count the stars. What does that mean, go out and count the stars? And you'll have that'll be your descendants. What do you mean go out? If you look up, you don't see, there's, how many stars are there? You can look up. There's not that many stars. What do you see? 1,000 stars? And so Ralbag says, and Ralbag says that we know there are not a lot of stars. But it must be that the imaginative faculty of Avraham, because he's a prophet, it showed him lots and lots of stars. So he saw all these stars, which refer to all his descendants, but that's really not the truth. That is, there aren't really that many stars. And so Mazuz is saying, though, that he only said this because in his day, they thought that there were only 1,000 stars. But really, today we know, because we have a telescope, there's millions of stars. Not only the million of stars, I saw online, I don't know how they know this, but the scientists claim that there are more stars in the universe, the galaxy, whatever the universe, than there are sand on the seashore. Now, I don't know how they know that, but if there's more stars than there are sand, and there's infinite numbers of sand, and there's infinite numbers of stars, the point is that when Avraham he said, if you can count the stars, it's meaning that, because if it's just the stars, see, the Rabbi had a problem. What does it mean if you say count the stars? There aren't that many stars. Look out tonight. How many stars do you see? You see 1,000, you see 500. What do you see? Maybe in the country you see more, but you don't see that many. And the whole point of the prophecy was supposed to be that the Jews are going to be, millions and throughout generations, all these. And yet you don't see that in the stars. So Rabbi says he wasn't actually looking at stars in his prophecy. It was a prophecy. So the imaginative faculty can show myriads of stars. And Rav Mazuz says that that's missing the whole point, that there are lots of stars. Maybe we can't see them all. Avraham can't see them all, or maybe he was revealed that there's more, whatever it was. But the point is, now we know that there are an infinite number of stars. So the deeper meaning of the prophecy of Avraham, if you can count the stars, is only apparent today. People 200 years ago couldn't even understand what this meant. Can you imagine 200 years ago, if you can count the stars? What would that mean? Of course you can count the stars. There aren't that many stars. But now that we know that there's an infinite number of stars, that's what Ramazuz's point is, then you really see the real prophecy. And he's saying, and that shows the Ralbag is wrong for saying that this is all just like, he says that the kohanim, his imaginative faculty, created, even though it's not true, all these stars. But if it's a prophecy, and that's how we understand it, and imaginative faculty showed him all these stars, it's because they really do exist, all these stars. So Rav Moses is giving an example, thus just where the Ralbag, because of his reliance on medieval science, is mistaken. That's interesting in and of itself. And then he ends, Hashem atov b'chabrabad, that, God should forgive the Ralbag for saying these sorts of things. But my experience has been that in yeshivas, you'd ask people about the Ralbag. This is one of the reasons I like Rav Moses very much, because in the Ashkenazic world, all the Rebbes they ever had, you'd ask them about the Ralbag. They don't know who Ralbag is. They know he wrote a commentary, but this idea they never heard of, even though it's in the Rivash. I remember when I was in high school, when I first started reading about the Ralbag, I'd ask people, and they'd say, "No, you don't understand the Ralbag." Of course, they've never seen the Ralbag, but they know it can't be right, because how could the Ralbag, the great Ralbag, say that? Well, if you learn a little more, you see that some people didn't think he was so great. I think he's great because his commentary on Chumash is amazing. He at the end of each section, he sums up for you the lessons in Midot and the lessons in Deot. But he had some unusual views, but he's not the only. Every great figure has unusual views, and every great philosopher, Rav Chasdei Kreskas, the Rambam, Rav Sadia Gaon, the Ravad. Rabbi Kelman before mentioned the Ravad. There's 3 Ravads. There's the Ravad that on the Rambam, and then there's the other Ravad, the medieval Rishon, the halakhic Ravad, and then there's the Avram ibn Daud, who's the author of the work Emunah Ramah. He also has radical, unusual views, and Rav Kook has unusual views, and everyone has unusual views if they're great, because their mind is always thinking and coming up with original thoughts. So that's the Ralbag. You have to ask your local rabbi if you can read the Milchamos Hashem, but it's hard. It's bad print. They haven't reprinted it in a nice print, perhaps because no one wants to reprint it. This is the one I'm holding here is from the printing from like 500 years ago or 400 years ago. But it's already 9:30. So let us start. Oh, this is it. We finished Even HaEzer. We're going to move on a little bit of Choshen Mishpat, some interesting questions of Choshen Mishpat, and then we'll get into issues of state and halakha, also darchei, how to decide halakha, all sorts of stuff about books, Jewish books, philosophical matters. We have lots of good stuff coming. We're about halfway through. Kuf Pei Aleph, that's 181. Yeah, almost halfway through. So let me take some questions and comments here. One more thing about the Ralbag. The first, when I was in Rav Soloveitchik's kollel, this was the last time he had the kollel, the summer of 85. Then he gave shiur at YU in the fall of 85, and then he had to stop. So we would daven on Shabbos at, when we were there Shabbos. I wasn't there most of Shabbos. A couple times I went. I was living somewhere else. But I went on Tisha B'Av, I remember, to the Tolner base medrash. So the Rav Soloveitchik, the shiurim were at Maimonides. And by the way, the Rav at this time wasn't going to Minyan in the morning. We'd bring him to Maimonides, it wasn't Maimonides, it was Young Israel Brooklyn. We'd bring him to the Young Israel, and then they'd read Torah for him on Monday and Thursday, because he hadn't been to shul that morning. But sometimes we would go daven at Twersky's, Professor Twersky, Rabbi Twersky, the Tolner Stiebel. So I remember one of the guys who was in the kollel, he told people he made a meeting to meet with Professor Twersky, a private meeting, because he wanted to discuss Ralbag with him. He obviously had just learned, or whatever, that Ralbag had his unusual views, and he wanted to talk about, how he's in the canon and how we're supposed to, as Torah Jews, supposed to relate to the Ralbag. I don't know what Twersky told him, but Naftali Wart says, as new sefer, Crossing the Date Line by Rabbi Mordechai Kuber. This Mordechai Kuber, I did meet him, actually, sort of, because his brother was my neighbor for a number of years, and they were sitting Shiva together, and that's where I met him. But he works, I know, for the OU and others. He's a rabbi in Israel. I don't know him, but I did see that there are he has 3 volumes. That's dealing with the date line. Yeah, we dealt with the date line in the classes on the Shanghai. Then that's Shanghai, the Mir Yeshiva, when they were in Japan before they went to Shanghai. But in 3 volumes, I think he'll be able to cover pretty much everything. Baruch says, regarding hat on in photos, he says it's Hasidic influence. The Hasidim are into that. Also, maybe the turn to the right in general. And other Hasidic rabbis daven apart from the tzibur in a special room, Ruzhin. Not only that, the Bluzhov. When I was a young lad, I used to go on Shabbatones in Borough Park. This is even before I was bar mitzvah. And once we daven with the Bluzhov Rebbe. The Bluzhov Rebbe is the one made famous for people who don't know about Hasidus by, what's her name? Eliach. Yafa Eliach, her book on Hasidic tales of the Holocaust, because none of the tales come from the Bluzhov Rebbe. He also did not daven. I remember davening there once, and he was davening upstairs. This was either Shabbos morning or Mincha Ma'ariv. The Rebbe used to daven with the Minyan Shabbos, because I also used to go to Shabbatones to Crown Heights. And I davened with the Rebbe, not in Shabbos morning. He did daven in the main room, but also Shabbos afternoon he davened in a small room upstairs. Shmuel said, "Your Salvation Chabad beloved, share anything interesting about the Rav?" The story I heard is no. It's just that he was the Rebbe. Baruch, did the Baal Shem Tov daven with the minyan always when he was wandering in forests? I guess not. And the elder of Navardic did extend his podus in the forest. Did he have a minyan? No. I'll give you something better. The Chazon Ish. I'm going to publish this, but I thank Ruvain from Paris who sent it to me. Ruvain, I don't know if he's with us now. It's a little late in Paris, but he listens later sometime when he's not with us. The Chazon Ish has a tshuva. They've recently been publishing his tshuva, in which he recommends to one person, Mincha Erev Shabbos, not to daven with a minyan, to daven by himself. Sort of like hispodadus, to get into this ready for Shabbos. They cut that out from a recent publication of the Chazon Ish's tshuva. The idea that the Chazon Ish would say that for certain people not to daven with a minyan. Jay says Rosh Hashanah used to send people one on abortion to Sicily Ezer who would give him the heter that he could not. Yes, that is true. And in general, anytime you ask the question, you have an abortion issue. The reason you're asking the question is because you want to be told it's permissible. If the rabbi tells you no, you're not going to do it. If you follow halacha, you're supposed. But you don't need to ask the rabbi for a no. You're only asking because the yes. So Shlomo Zalman Auerbach would send people if he thought it was a serious case. He held that he couldn't find a reason to permit, but you could rely on the Tzitz Eliezer. Baruch says this conception that every Jew lives in a suburban area near a shul and davens every tefillah with a minyan is not historically accurate. Absolutely, Baruch's absolutely correct. You can read the Ramban's letter when he comes to Eretz Yisrael, and he tells you how many Jews are living in Jerusalem. We know in Germany, for instance, and the Jews were living in small towns. In Spain, you had Jews living in all these small towns. They did not have a minyan. And how do we know we didn't have a minyan? Because we have tshuvot that describe how on Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and Shabbos, they would come to the town, the bigger city nearby for a minyan, but they went a whole week without a minyan. And that's, you had many places like that. All the people who were traveling salesmen, things like that, but they tried to come home for Shabbos. But even Shabbos, they didn't always get a minyan. Howard says, wasn't Or Sameach located in Israel, so asking Rosh Hashanah rather than Moshe in the U.S. may have been more appropriate? Two things. Actually, the question was asked by the Or Sameach in Toronto. But it was appropriate to ask because that was the main branch. My only point was the only reason there was to ask was because Ramosha had ruled stringently. Had Ramosha already ruled that this was permissible, I said that I couldn't imagine that Or Sameach in Toronto would have felt the need then to ask Rosh Shlomo Zalman. I mean, would Or Sameach have then asked Rosh Shlomo Zalman? Maybe Aryeh is going to tell me yes, they would have anyway. But I think that had Ramosha given a ruling that this is permissible, you wouldn't need to then start asking Rosh Shlomo Zalman, can we rely on Ramosha? That's my sense. Jake Helmut, statistics are for losers. Okay. No, there's liars, something, there's lies, dirty lies or something, and then there's statistics, something like that.
That's a sports analogy.
Yeah, sports analogy. Isser says, since we're concerned with dikduk, the word is dikduk. Yeah, except for we're speaking as Ashkenazim, and therefore Ashkenazim put the accent in the first half. If we were reading it, yes, we would say dikduk. But when you talk, you like I was the makri, so I wasn't saying tekiah, teruah. I said tekiah, teruah. Well, I guess that's sort of, but I said tekiah gedola. I didn't say tekiah gedola. Tekiah gedola, because that's what people know. Susanna says maybe it's Harei something. So Harei mekudeshet, yes, it would be, but he doesn't say that. He says bazeh, this item. I mean, he could have said be-taba'at, or he doesn't say it. It could be, you're right. Ellen says, my Birnbaum did 79 says, oh, yes, thanks for reminding me. I do recall it says it. Birnbaum was very into dikduk. So I wonder if anyone, though, was saying it, Zoe, in those days. Rav Yaakov Emden, why did he promote pilegesh? Shmuel asks. Well, I don't know how to say this with tact. Rav Yaakov Emden had certain unusual things with sexuality. So much so that there's a book that came out by Mortimer Cohen in the 30s or 40s that claims that the whole issues which he had with Jonas and Eibschitz are all about, he does some whole psychosexual thing. It's clear, without a doubt, that if you go through Rav Yaakov Emden's works, he always deals with sexual matters. In his autobiography, he deals with matters that are just shocking that he would speak about it, including the time that his cousin tried to seduce him. And he talks about how how he needed his wife and all this sort of thing. And pilegesh, he says, would keep people at certain times of the month, they'd be able to not have impure thoughts, and it's a way of controlling sexual urges. And he also thinks that the whole idea of Rabbeinu Gershom, he doesn't like that. So he has that's the reason that he's interested in pilegesh. Could the son of the pilegesh be the bechor for purposes of an inheritance? We had the discussion on the bus, I think, with you, Alan, about what the definition of a bechor is. And I think it depends on different circumstances. When sometimes we say it's the bechor of the mother, but I think for inheritance, no. For inheritance, no. Inheritance would be for the father. But we had this whole thing. We spoke about Tanis bechoros, what it should be. How is a pilegesh relationship dissolved? According to some, you need a get. The ones who hold it, you need it that it's erusin or a kiddushin. So according to those, you would need a get. According to the others, I don't know. We have to. I don't know if he can ever do it unilaterally without having a say. I think he can, according to the others. Oh, I'm sorry. So thank you, Naft Howard. The Avodas Yisrael of Zalman Ber, also a great grammarian, says tabaz zo. I was of the opinion that none of the Ashkenazim said it until recent years. Now, someone also points out that in the new Tfilas Yeshurin, which I have a copy over here, this center, I saw for the first time on one of our trips to Vienna. It's called Tfilas Yeshurin. It's the first sitter really ever published for Ashkenazim, which it's 2016. Here, which is uncensored, completely uncensored. Every, we have all these censorships in our sitter, and he's taking care of everything. And that's including, look at Shemon Esrei in the morning and the evening. This is, I think, the first sitter ever to stick this back in, the actual version. He says zo. It's interesting that Tfilas Yeshurin, because that also holds to old Ashkenazic minhag, and yet we have plenty of sources that the old minhag is zo. So I guess it's moved, and now it's going to be zo. So someone emailed me privately in Spanish. The M and N are often interchanged. So Gersonides, Gersonides, so Gershom or Gershom could be the same thing, although he wasn't from Spain, he was from Provence. And the thing is, the problem is that they're writing in Hebrew. But it could be that it was just wasn't clear. Shmuel says in one of Razuz's recent Parsha sheets, he praises Rabbi's Parish on Chumash. Yes, he says he worked through the entire thing a page a day. Today, if anyone's interested, Masada Rav Kook published an edition of the Rabbi's commentary, but it's no good. They didn't use manuscripts. What you want to use, and you can see this in Otzar Chachma, is Yeshivas, the Mali Adum Yeshiva, Birkat Moshe. They have an excellent edition of the Rabag on Chumash with wonderful notes. And someone privately emails me, not infinitely numbers of sand, finite but very large. Obviously, I don't mean infinite. I mean infinite in a clearly there's an amount, just very large. And stars likewise, yes. Baruch says, nowadays you don't see so many stars in large urban areas due to artificial light. So, and Mel says you can see 5,000 visible stars. But even 5,000 visible stars, is that a lot of stars? How many, when he's saying that you're going to have descendants to the end of time, in other words, I could see the problem. If you just look at it and say you can't see that many stars, you see, and especially there's a contrast. Kadosh Baruch Hu says the sand and the stars, but there's a lot. You have more sand in one little area on the beach there than you have all the stars you can see, and that's what led the Ralbag to say, well, he's not actually seeing it; it's just his prophetic vision. But the prophetic vision just created this through his imaginative faculty. When the truth is that no, it's not just imaginative faculty; that's the reality. When's the next lecture? Well, I guess it'll be 2 weeks from today because next week is Yom Kippur. Mel says there are more than 200 billion galaxies, which easily contain more stars than there are grains of sand on Earth. Yes, that's what I saw. How the astronomers know that there are 200 billion galaxies, I do not know, but thank you, Alan Wise, damn wise in statistics. Someone privately mentions, okay. Yes, I daven an outdoor minyan. In my town, there were an indoor minyanim, but almost everyone I know daven an outdoor minyan. Why go to an indoor minyan? We had an outdoor minyan with a beautiful chazan, and we did everything. We didn't, actually, I shouldn't say we did everything. We did Ramaseach one time. And they didn't do the last 40 tekiyas in accord with Shachter's Psak. But other than that, we did everything, and it was good. Ellen says, if pilegesh gives birth to a man's first male child, that child should be bechor for purposes of inheritance. Yeah. You don't need to be married for inheritance. Baruch says, as far as I know, Baruch says, no, the shofar was covered at the end. We covered the shofar. Netziv has a different Beshat Ray stars that Hashem saying to everyone will be like the stars. You mean shiny, things like that? I don't know what you mean by that, but we will. Okay, everyone. I want to thank you all for coming today. We will meet, God willing, in 2 weeks, because next week is Yom Kippur, where I'll be outside again, and we'll do the same thing, and hopefully it'll be good weather. So he says great stature, that is level. That's what it means, stars. They'll be like the stars. Okay, well, that's also maybe the Siv is dealing with that problem. What does it mean, the numbers of stars? Again, thank you all. Thank you those who have texted me and emailed me who I haven't got around to all your points. Maybe in 2 weeks I'll get to them. Rabbi Kelman, just final words.
Thank you. Okay, wish everybody Gemar Chatima Tova. Thank you. And